Welcome to Tribe Talk. You're here with Rachel Evans
and Laura Neal,
and today we're going to be talking about contact and family time.
So contact is something that's really important for many of our children in foster care. Some of them love contact, some of them are a little apprehensive about contact, some of them worry about going to contact. So we're going to have a look at all of those different contact experiences that our children might have and how we can support them.
So in today's episode, we'll be looking at contact from a trauma-informed lens and looking at the experiences from our children and also the adults that support them.
So first off, let's start off by talking about what contact actually is, because I think we're really aware that people who are not in the social care field might not even know what contact is at all.
Exactly. So let's define it. So, children who are care experienced, those that are in foster care, would have contact with their birth family. So that might be with mum, dad, sometimes grandparents, siblings. And that contact session would be set up with birth family. So, and then a child would then go along to have contact with their family. Now, sometimes the settings could be specified. There's supervised, there's unsupervised contact. So it could be different for every child.
But yeah, there's lots of different types of contact. There's also letterbox contact, but what we're specifically going to be talking about today is direct contact.
Yeah, direct contact.
And as Rachel said, that could be a session that's set up in the community. It could be a session that's set up in a specific contact centre, and it could be supervised or unsupervised. Lots of different types of contact that children might have with their family members.
So contact between a child and their family is set up for lots of different reasons, and that is like a key component in a child's care planning. So where a court would stipulate that contact would need to be set up for a child to maintain a relationship with their birth family, with their siblings, because that supports who they are, their identity, their belonging, and it maintains those relationships with their family.
Yeah, and some children will have a lot of contact and others not so much, and it also depends on where they are within the court process, how much contact they have as well. But for our foster carers who are listening, they'll be well versed in contact and taking children to contact weekly, monthly,
yes.
Depending on what their schedule is.
Yeah, the frequency can look so different, and some children might have contact sessions with just their parents, say like mum and dad separately, or the siblings would also come along if they're not in foster care with their siblings, or they might have contact with their siblings separately as well. So sometimes foster carers feel that there's lots of contact sessions that happen, or they have to fit it into their calendar.
They can actually make the week really busy, particularly if you're caring for several different children who have several different contact schedules as well.
Yeah.
It can be really busy. But what we're specifically going to focus on today is some of the benefits, but then also some of the pressures that might be faced with contact.
Because I suppose that also depends on whether contact is supervised by someone from social services, or whether contact is supervised by someone in their family, like a grandparent or something. So the pressures can vary.
Yeah, and I think that's becoming much more frequent as well, that contact is supervised. So we've got lots of children now who live with special guardians, so that's usually family members, and then family members might also be supervising any contact with mum and dad to make sure that the child can make the most of that, so that can place additional pressures then on the guardians.
So yeah, I guess that's what this episode's about, isn't it? Is looking at contact from the point of view from a child, but also from the adults that are supporting the child as well, linking in some of the additional pressures that it comes with that, and their experiences as well, and how like the emotions that come with that.
Yeah, and importantly, how we get the most out of contact. So how can we make contact the best experience that it can be for children?
And positive as well.
So ideally we want contact to be a really positive experience for children. So if we were to think about a perfect contact setup, it might look something like this. So contact is scheduled, for this example we'll use on a weekly basis.
Yeah.
So it could be every Thursday after school contact is scheduled. The child goes to exactly the same place, exactly the same room, they're taken by the same person, they have the same contact worker. The setup is exactly the same, so they know what to expect. Yeah. Their parent or whoever they're having contact with is there on time, they're ready to greet them, they know what to do in contact to make that contact experience as positive as possible for their child. So they might have some pre-arranged games, they might have some pre-arranged snacks set up that don't disrupt things later on in the evening, like meal times, so that experience is really positive, the child enjoys that. There's a really good transition at the end of contact back to the carers, positive relationships between the carers and the parents, and that child transitions back to the carer, back into the car, and goes home and is able to have some downtime and settle at home before having a meal or going to bed at the end of the day. So that's ideally what we'd love contact to look like. Yeah. Doesn't always look like that though.
Yeah, and you've pointed out key things that would happen in contact and where some difficulties can arise. So looking at contact before, so like the lead up, so you said on a Thursday that contact, say, happens every week. So what's happening in the beginning of the week, so like the lead up to contact, and even on that day, and then during contact and after contact. So there's lots of different things that might come up that for children and adults that are also supporting, so carers, what can come up that rocks the boat a little bit, and makes that contact experience a little bit more difficult.
Yeah. So should we break this down to before, during and after? Talk about before first off?
Yeah, let's go for that. So before contact, there's, if it's happening weekly, let's take that example, and you mentioned in that example as well that consistency and predictability is so important, and that is embedded into all our advice. And especially for children in the lead up to contact, we want to make things as consistent as possible. So even the plans, so when we are preparing a child for contact, or their carers are preparing them for that contact session, being really descriptive about what that contact session is going to look like. So who's going to be there, what time we're going, where we're going, who's that going to be supervised by, what activities are going to happen. So providing them with that level of detail in terms of the planning, so they're prepared, and even how they might be feeling. Carers can bring to the conversation, it's okay to have mixed feelings, it's okay to be excited, but this is how we manage some of those feelings. So yeah, I would say like the prep and the planning that goes in before is really important. Yeah, it's really important, and something you mentioned there and I mentioned in the perfect example was that consistency, but unfortunately what we know is that consistency doesn't always happen as well. So it's not always the same contact worker, for example. No. It might be that contact is in a different room or a different location than usual. Games that are typically played have been broken and are not available, so there's all these little things that can come up. Or it's cancelled.
Or it's cancelled,
someone's off sick and they can't supervise it, or parents can't show up, or siblings can't show up for whatever reason. So those types of difficulties can crop up, which and when those happen on a number of occasions, that then feeds into children's anxiety around going to contact as well. Like, is it going to happen? Is it going to be the same? What's going to happen when I'm there? So that's why we always promote consistency and predictability, because it's so important, because it not only disrupts that contact, it disrupts future contacts as well if it doesn't happen. Yeah, and like you said, the child's beliefs around the roles of professionals and the roles of all the adults that are involved in terms of being trusted in following through on those plans. So with that, can bring up a lot of emotions, which then may lead on to behavioural outbursts as well. So without that consistency and planning, you might see some of those behaviours begin to bubble. So some of those behaviours that might already be present, the intensity of them can sometimes increase, especially in the lead up, when those structures and plans are not in place, and that's really difficult for carers to be managing as well.
Yes, you can see increase in, hyperactivity is a big one, increase in just movement and what the child is doing, increase in anxiety, from our teenagers, increase in the back chat that you get, and the maybe derogatory comments towards you as a carer in that lead up to contact. And there's lots that can be fueling that. It will be the emotion of going to contact. It can be the inconsistency of contact, the worry about, is it going to go ahead, is it not going to happen this week? All of that contributes.
So it brings up like a whole host of feelings, and for some children as well, where their level of emotional understanding is underdeveloped, for them then to be able to manage those emotions or even understand what they're even feeling is tricky for them. So not only are they not understanding what they're feeling going into contact, they're also unable to manage that leading into contact as well. There's all that to think about as well as a foster carer, to be preempting some of those difficulties in the lead up to contact, and how they can still provide a lot of consistency and predictability, but also how they're managing, preempting, and then supporting and managing some of those challenges.
So there's a number of things that might come up before contact, but some typical things that we often hear reported from carers are children whose sleep patterns change before contact. We've seen changes in toileting before contact, particularly when contact is probably less so when contact is frequent, but for example, if contact is every month, or for some children it can be every quarter or only during the school holidays, their toileting patterns can change, so they can start having accidents before contact, and that's something we hear fairly often. The questions around who am I with today, or who am I seeing today, can come up as well. A little more uncertainty around, am I going to be coming home with you, and what am I going to be doing, and will I need to take my things with me? There's lots of questions that are going to come up in relation to where they're going to come home to afterwards, particularly if they're with a new foster carer as well.
Because they know that there's something different to that day, and do they need to respond differently? In response to those changes of plans when they go into contact. And I think we hear quite a lot of contact sessions being set up every 6 weeks, which sometimes tend to fall like every half term. So when they're that infrequent, when children know there's a change to their plan or to their day, it brings up more of those questions. And also like how they respond to their foster carers as well, so that they might present a little bit differently. So we mentioned about defiance and non-compliance, but also might be wanting their attention a little bit more, or let's just use the word clingy, presenting a little bit more clingy towards them, because they're uncertain about what that day is going to look like or what contact's going to look like. So they're trying to control as much as possible. So really any of these things you might see before contact happen, and it happens, and it can be quite individualised and unique to each individual child, and also dependent on age. So a teenager is going to respond very differently to a younger child. Younger child, you might see a lot more clinginess. An older child, you might see much more rejection, depending on how they're feeling at the time. Spending more time in their bedroom. But their presentation might look very, very different in that they're maybe quite sullen, but then you might see on the other hand the hyperactivity and being overstimulated, being unable to manage some of those big emotions.
So those are some of the difficulties those are some of the difficulties before contact. Yeah. What about during contact?
Yeah, so you mentioned, didn't you, Laura, about like having consistent time, consistent place, consistent person supervising that contact, even down to snacks being available, same toys, or the environment being quite consistent. So when things like that are not in place and planned for, you may see differences in presentation. So just taking those two environments. So you've got a child in their foster placement, and then you go into a contact session with birth family being supervised by somebody else. Those rules and boundaries, expectations may look completely different. Yeah. So that can bring up, a lot of confusion if they're not clearly communicated, and children responding very differently. So if there's not a lot of rules and boundaries or expectations in place, you might see some of those escalations in behaviour, children trying to control that environment to feel that sense of safety, leading on to maybe behavioural challenges or emotional challenges.
Yeah.
And then when that happens, are the people around then able to support a child that's having difficulties with their behaviours and their emotions, being able to manage that in the moment?
And even I think whose responsibility is that, because different contact setups have different expectations. So there might be an expectation that the contact worker who's supervising goes in and provides some support, or there might be an expectation that they don't provide any support, in which case it's the person that the child is having contact with who needs to support the child. And I think a really good thing is for carers to check what's the expectations within contact, so they're really aware as well. Yeah,
because there are some cases where foster carers are not involved in that contact setup, especially if they're not supervising. So I think, from experience and speaking to foster carers, that they find that quite difficult with not knowing what their child's doing for X amount of hours and what the expectation is on them, unless something is fed back at the end.
Yeah.
Contact sessions as well, they might be set up very differently, where maybe siblings go all together to see birth family. And sometimes children can struggle with that, where they have to share the attention. So if you can imagine a child seeing their mum or their dad every 6 weeks, and then having to share that attention with their sibling that they don't live with, or they might live with them, but that them wanting that one-to-one quality undivided attention has now become, I've got to share that with my sibling. And with the children that we support having very different needs often, siblings having very different needs, parents having to manage that, it's parents are with one child, then we have to flip our attention to somebody else, like the other child, and the dynamics there are really tricky to navigate.
Yeah, particularly as you said, if that contact is only every 6 weeks and that's the only chance the children get to see their parents, and they're both going to want that interaction. Or sometimes not. So if you've got two children who've got two different attachment styles, you could have one who really wants that attention and interaction, and one who steps back but actually needs that attention and interaction to get that quality contact time as well. So it can be very different. And this is just reminding me as well about the difference between contact that. So I've been to a lot of supervised contact sessions in my time. And there can be some that are really lovely, very interactive, quite calm. But then I've also been to contact sessions that have just been chaos. And that's usually where might be more than one sibling, and there are very few rules and boundaries, so they can be climbing on sofas, jumping at things, trying to get not only parents' attention, sometimes it could be the contact workers' attention, because those rules and boundaries aren't there. because maybe mum and dad haven't been guided in providing those rules and boundaries. The children are running everywhere, they're grabbing different toys, and it can be very chaotic. And then you can imagine children would come out of that situation remaining very chaotic, so very heightened, going back to their foster carers, and their foster carers thinking, wow, this behaviour is off the scale and nothing we've ever seen. But it's because of that time with that lack of structure, and if that's the lack of structure that they had previously, they can be maybe taken back to those circumstances in the way that they think they should interact. So then you've got carers who are seeing that coming out of contact, and I think this is where we then get discussions around contact's not working, contact is detrimental, and I think the reality is it doesn't have to be detrimental. A lot of the time it might be the way that it's set up.
And I suppose this is why we've broken it down like this, to look at like before, during and after. Because I think there's lots of things that are sometimes not spoken about or are not thought about when setting contact up. But there are some of those key times before, during and after, or some key things that might come up for foster carers to be considering when trying to set up a positive contact with social workers, or maybe with their child's birth family, to make it a really positive experience. Because we know that supporting the children that we work with, there are difficulties all of the time, but there are some effective ways in which we can support them, set these contact sessions up, so we are limiting the intensity or the frequency of these challenges cropping up.
And that's a lot to do with preparing the actual contact session and preparing parents for that contact session, or whoever's having contact with that child, making sure that they have got the tools they need to be able to make it a positive contact. You're kind of stepping into the realms. It's often called therapeutic contact, but I don't think it is therapeutic contact. I think it is contact, but it's contact with more guidance than just it's supervised and you're not given any guidance.
And that's what I was going to touch on. Planning contact with professionals. So, you know, when there's multidisciplinary meetings, like we need to be having those conversations, or in reviews, like CLAR reviews, children, planning contact sessions out, like discussing how well they're working, the frequency of contact, what does that look like, and planning that out, because it's so important.
Is there any support that's needed within these sessions to make it more positive for the child, so they can have a positive experience? Because that's what we want at the end of the day. So
because they want that quality time with their parents, or grandparents, siblings, whoever that may be. But with their parents, they also want that time to be positive, and wanting that guidance as well to make that positive for them. So Laura, you then touched on that transition from contact ending to then the child leaving that contact session, going home with foster carers. So after contact and what that looks like, and that can bring up some difficulties for children. Like you've mentioned one where if contact is quite chaotic, or they're overstimulated for whatever reason, that then can play out during that transition. I feel like most of my consultations with families are, if we're ever talking about contact, it's those transitions around contact that can be challenging.
But on that, planning those transitions as well, like what does that look like? So that handover between parents or grandparents and foster carer, what does that look like? How is that planned? That's so important. And I think it's missed sometimes as well. It's not something that is on the forefront of our mind, but it should be, because that can be critical in making sure that the child has a positive experience going home.
And I've supported some families in the past where there's been a lot of difficulties around contact, and we looked at that transition, and it was actually the debrief that was happening from the end of contact to the handover, let's just call it that, to back to foster carers, and it was just too long. It was too wordy and sometimes negative. If we were talking about, or if they were talking about the child's behaviour in contact session, and the child was overhearing that, and that just brought up even more difficulties then.
And something you shouldn't really do in a transition is the same as when that's done at the end of the school day between school and home. Have a book that you put in instead, because you don't want your child to be overhearing that.
Especially those conversations around behaviour. We just want pleasantries at that point, and everything else can be discussed after. But that can bring up that transition can often be quite difficult for children, like you said, if that's not planned. Those behaviours spilling over then into the car journey, night. And like we mentioned, that you might have then some difficulties with some of the skills like toileting or eating, food refusal and things like that. If we haven't got that plan that we're following.
I think similarly then, as we had before contact, you can have similar difficulties after contact. So disruptions in sleep, disruptions in maybe toileting routine, more bedwetting, all of those things can come up after contact as well as before contact. So to be mindful of them.
And I was also thinking about a child's presentation if they were slightly quieter. Thinking about, can I actually talk about my contact session with my foster carers? I'm not sure if I can, or if I'm allowed to, and having conflict in terms of loyalty and not knowing what to discuss, when to discuss that. And I think foster carers as well, they've reported on cases that I've supported in the past, not knowing how to respond to some of those quiet times, or a child that's asking a lot of questions, like when will I see my mum and dad next? Things like that might come up, and they might not have the answers. So being able to hold that child in that space, provide that reassurance afterwards. And just allow them to talk is quite uncomfortable. Because I think our go-to is, I've got to answer these questions, but just providing that reassurance. Or even children that might be separated from their siblings, they might be worried about where are they going now, who's going to look after them, and they have questions around that. So providing that reassurance is also important.
Definitely. This is actually what our life story listening training is all about. So I think if there are any carers listening who think, that's me, have a look at our life story listening training, because that really goes into how you respond to these. When you don't have the answers, what do you do? How do you respond? How do you support your child in the moment when you don't have the answers and don't actually have a lot of information to be able to provide?
And these things come up when we least expect it, and we haven't got a rehearsed answer. So I think that would come up quite a lot with foster carers.
Most certainly.
So we've talked now about about contact, some of those difficulties that can come up before, during and after. And I think from our experience, when we've been supporting families, there are some key things that have cropped up, or some key themes, key difficulties that have cropped up. And just to highlight them really for foster carers. So if you're a new foster carer, or you might have been fostering for quite some time now, but have a child that have just been placed with you, and considering contact arrangements, some of the things to be thinking about in professionals meetings in terms of discussions around contact. So I think one of the things is that expect some of those difficulties before and after. So I think sometimes carers think, on this particular day, so Thursday is contact after school, I know this is going to be a tricky day, but actually you might see some of these behaviours bubbling before, and then after contact your child's presentation might look very different. Like we said, might be quiet, or quieter than usual. Things are just out of the ordinary in terms of their presentation, and expect those difficulties or those behavioural bursts then, or those bursts in behaviour, because they're communicating to us, I'm worried about something that's coming up.
And
also when we're thinking about before and after contact, some of the other things that might come up are children needing a lot of reassurance around that time. So reassurance around the plans. Who's going to be there? Am I going to see my sister in this contact? Or is it just going to be my mum? Having lots of questions, and then thinking about how you're going to answer them as a foster carer. So go into those moments thinking, how am I going to provide that reassurance? How am I going to take all those questions on board? I need to answer them, but how are you as a foster carer preparing your child as much as possible when it comes to their contact session, and even after them, providing some of that reassurance to them. You might also be in a situation where siblings, your child has some of the siblings that are not placed with them, but maybe contact sessions, they're coming together for that contact session. And you might want to be considering the dynamics of that. So when contact happens, what is the setup with contact? Who is present during that contact, and how is contact going? Is it currently a positive experience? Because I think it's really important to kind of pick apart all of these things that we've spoken about. So what's happening before, what's happening during and after. When are those difficulties cropping up? And it might be with sibling dynamics, and having those conversations with professionals then do we need to have a different contact arrangement where the children have contact maybe all together as a family, but then there are those times where it's just with their siblings or just with their mum or their dad. So they're having those opportunities for that quality time. And then we've already touched on it, isn't it? Those transitions before and after. And it's important to keep those debriefs really short.
Yeah. In the moment, yeah.
Yeah, and pleasantries. Rather than going into, oh, he's been good today.
Yeah.
We've had a really good day. Oh, we didn't have a very good day in school. Limiting those conversations around a child's behaviour in the lead up.
Yeah.
Because it's going to be difficult for them. There's lots of things that are swirling around in their minds, impacting their emotions. So having a plan about what your debrief is going to look like, and the more that you can do that after the fact, written like you suggested, like text or email, if there is anything that's important in that handover. But in the moment when contact begins or contact ends, just keeping those handovers, this whole and debriefs really, really short. A question that commonly comes up from foster carers is around, what do they say around contact? Yeah. So am I saying the wrong thing when children have questions around contact, and what language is best to use? So what would you suggest in those moments?
Yeah, I think in terms of language, there's lots of different language you can use, but that consistency is important. Not only consistency in language, but consistency in message as well. Yeah. I think the last thing you want is for you as a carer to say something and then the social worker to visit and to say something different.
Or do something different.
Yeah. So to get that consistency between you. And sometimes it is about providing as much reassurance as you can, but also saying, I don't know.
Yeah.
So if the question is, when am I seeing mum again, and you don't know, just that reassurance of, I will find out for you and you'll know as soon as I do, but right now we don't know. We've got to get that information from your social worker. I think going into the steps you're going to take can be helpful and reassuring at times. So I'll speak to your social worker, they'll speak to your mum, they'll arrange it, and then we'll know, and I'll tell you as soon as I know. So conversations like that are fine. I think it's when we leave children in limbo not knowing, it causes so many more problems.
Yeah. And often foster carers are left in limbo if there isn't a plan.
Yeah.
So foster carers also feel a bit in limbo.
Yeah.
What is happening? What are the plans? But like you said, just providing that reassurance to the child that we will find out.
Yeah.
Oh, that's what I'll do tomorrow. When you're in school, I'm going to contact your social worker. Like you said, going through all of the steps. as to how you're going to get that information.
Yeah, I think in terms of language as well, it's important to use the child's language. So you earlier said ma'am, because you say ma'am, I say mum. Different places of Wales. But whatever the language the child uses, so if the child says mum, use mum. If the child says ma'am, say ma'am.
Yeah, so little things like
it
that.
is those little things that are really, really important. There's lots of different names for grandparents.
Yes.
So in terms of language, using the child's language, what do they call their grandparents as well?
And especially, you know, children that in a foster placement or a foster home that is new to them, like ask those questions as well. Like, what do you call your nanny, grandma? You know, ask them those questions. What they prefer. To call those people that are important to them.
Yeah.
And I suppose then, like you said, Laura, is if a child has questions, it's okay not to have the answers and to say like, I don't know.
Yeah.
So if a child is asking lots of questions, then about when, who am I going to see next? When is contact going to be? It's okay to say, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I'll find out.
Yeah. And if there's more in-depth questions, so something that comes up fairly often in our life story listening training is around, well, they've been told something in contact which isn't actually right, and now they've come home and we're faced with a question and we're not able to answer it. There's lots of different scenarios, and I would recommend coming on our life story listening training in that case, because we talk about lots of those different scenarios within that training and what you can do to answer some of those really, really tricky questions or tricky things that can come up during contact.
Yeah, because there's lots of moments where difficulties can come up. So that's the end of today's episode, and we've just unpicked really some of those difficulties that children and foster carers can experience during contact, but also those moments before and after.
Yeah.
And I suppose it just comes back to the key messages that we really wanted to get across was how you're planning those contact sessions, how you're remaining consistent in your messaging and your approach, and making that experience as positive as possible.
As we can,
even, like you said, down to those finer details, same time, same room, same toys, same environment. Because those subtle differences and those plans make so much difference.
Make a difference. And key to that is the same worker, because if that worker knows the family, they can support that consistency as well. So same contact worker where possible. So thank you everybody for listening today. If you want to know more about trauma-informed care, then subscribe to Tribe Talk for trauma-informed care in practice.